Hi everyone, today let's quickly talk about Zoom earnings, as well as the little bit of a dip that we saw across markets into the close. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and hit the bell to help out the channel. And let's get straight into it. So Zoom is up a lot here, 13% in extended trading on Monday. So a massive jump for the stock. Let's take a look at their earnings. They reported $1.22 per share versus $1.15 expected. Revenue is basically in line, so massive beat there on earnings. And they say that revenue increased less than 3%. So revenue not growing super strong, but they did say the magic words, as companies have been doing for a while at this point. They said AI, and they think AI is going to drive more growth. And they did launch a chat migration tool, which did cause a 4 times increase in downloads over the last 6 months. So in terms of growth, they did put out really strong guidance, and that's what's driving the stock higher in my opinion. Otherwise, looking over to the data, starting off with fear and greed, you can see we saw a step down to 76 versus the 77 that we saw yesterday. Pretty much no change here across the rest of the indicators. Still sitting in greed for breadth. All of the other major stock indicators are still in extreme greed. Volatility continues to hover just barely above that SMA. And you can see we've seen something like this before where you kind of rally up, come back down to the SMA, and then get that second spike here into the mid-month. We'll see if we get a follow through like that. And then safe haven demand and junk bond demand still sitting in extreme greed, really tight spreads across the bond market. Moving over to seasonality, remember we are in a period of weakness for seasonality, basically down here towards the end of the February period. And that is what we're seeing. We saw a little bit of sideways chop into a sell-off. So right now it is the 16th, but we saw rallies here last week on NVDA, and now we saw a little bit of selling into the 16th, which does fit with the narrative here on a normal year. Not really fitting in with the election year narrative right now. And this is really supposed to continue until about the 8th of next month. And on election years, that's actually a little bit weaker here in March. Could follow through all the way to the 15th of March. And that's a pretty substantial move down. The historical average on election years for the Russell 2000 is down 4%. And then you can see the NASDAQ as well as the Russell 1000 close to that 3% mark. So pretty substantial down moves potentially over the next 2 to 3 weeks due to seasonality. Moving over to earnings just for a moment, you can see there was pretty much nothing on here for today. Domino's Pizza, massive beat on earnings, but missed on revenue. So Domino's up a little bit after hours, beating by 10 cents on the bottom line. And then tomorrow you got Lowe's, American Tower, AutoZone, eBay, always fun to watch for tomorrow. And then on Wednesday you do have Salesforce, Monster Beverage, Dollar Tree, couple of bigger companies out there still, but not many. Moving over to the economic calendar, you can see we did get new home sales, and those did miss for January. Not great. 661,000 versus 680, and you can see the previous number here was revised down as well. Month over month number also missing pretty substantially. In terms of the auctions, 2-year note went up to 4.69 from 4.36. And then 5-year note auction also going up 4.32 versus 4.05. And then for tomorrow, you do have core durable goods in the morning at 8:30. And then at 10 o'clock, you do have consumer confidence, also a pretty big one there. And then Wednesday, you have GDP numbers at 8:30. So lots of data coming out this week, and a couple of Fed members speaking in the afternoon on Wednesday as well. Moving over to Max Payne, you can see it's still sitting at 500, stock price 507. So we saw a bit of a dip there. 500 still seems like the level we're going to finish below for the Friday session. So that would give you about another 1.5% of downside potential for this week. 495 seems like the level we would find some support. So 495 to 500. Total options pretty high already at 1.1 million. Put call ratio pretty low there at 1.89. It's been over 2 for a while, so that could give markets a little bit of downside potential. Again, Max Payne looks weak, just like we talked about on the Sunday video. Moving over to the charts, starting off with the S&Ps. This was a pretty weak session, honestly. You can see the S&Ps were actually falling throughout the session, and that last candle was quite bearish. So we got basically a continuation of the Friday session. Said it looked weak into the close, tried to pop up, couldn't quite do it, retested the 21, and then sold off here on the hourly chart. And then you can see that here on the daily chart as well. Does not look great. Up candle on NVIDIA, basically a sideways candle, tried to go higher, couldn't do it. And then on the Monday session, selling off, closing closing on the low does not look great going into the Monday session, stepping down on momentum. RSI obviously on the shorter time frames, as well as momentum quite bearish. And then looking at the daily chart, looks like the RSI just barely broke below the SMA at 65.50 versus 66.12. All short-term bearish indicators. You can see we're hovering at that 55 EMA on the hourly chart at 505.62. So we're actually a little bit lower than the max pain chart mentioned. Remember, 500 is the level to finish below. And then you have the 21 EMA sitting at 496.70 on the daily chart. So that's where we would finish most likely, between that and the 500 level. So right back in the middle of this range throughout February at this point. So looks like we're getting a pop and a drop back down into that mid-range. Moving over to the NASDAQ, pretty different thesis, honestly. You can see we were falling more on the Friday session than we were versus the S&Ps. We didn't go any higher either on that Friday session. The S&Ps were actually positive on that Friday session, and you can see here we were definitely negative. Tried to get above 438, couldn't do it, and then sold off into the end of the session. It was actually really aggressive into the end of the session when I wasn't watching it nearly as closely as I should have been. Got very close to the after hours lows from Friday. You can see we did get a little bit of a bounce here, but this looks like consolidation at best, if not weakness across markets here. Support 55 EMA at 435.70, and then resistance at 438, and you can see it here on the daily chart. 2 bearish days in a row, 0.05 to the downside. 433.24 is support there, like I mentioned, and then you got the 9-day moving average at 432.35. And then if we touch the 21, like I mentioned on the SPY, that would be 429.98, right in that 430 area, which definitely seems plausible at this point. So a little bit more than 1% to the downside, just like we're looking at on the SPY. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow, you can see the Russell was positive on the day, 0.63%. The Dow was negative, 0.15, so interesting flip there. Momentum, both of these still holding in bullish territory, so you would expect the Russell to get back above 201.88 tomorrow, and then you have some trend resistance at 202.90. Then we'll see what happens after that. Momentum and RSI, like I said, both bullish here, continuing to hold higher lows. Big rally, dip low, held that 55 EMA. Another big rally, held the 21 EMA, 3 bullish candles in a row. So we'll see if we get more continuation there. And then looking at the Dow, quite a bit less interesting, but it is looking more similar to the SPY as well, with the big NVDA move. Slight bullish candle selling on the Monday session. Let's look at that on the hourly. Pretty much the same. You can see that selling on Friday, tried to retrace, more selling on Monday. So bearish momentum, bearish RSI here on the shorter time frames for the Dow. Moving over to the Mag 7, we did get a bearish day here, 0.13 to the downside. Momentum, basically nothing. RSI breaking down from the SMA. We almost touched it there on Thursday. Friday broke down more, and then another slight step down here on the Monday session. And you can see we're actually down a little bit after hours. Let's go ahead and look at that on the hourly chart. Pretty similar to everything else. Sell off Friday, continuation here a little bit lower, more similar to the NASDAQ actually now that I look at it. Let's go back to the daily chart here. You can see obviously the longer time frame is still very much an uptrend, but we are at a point of resistance, and it seems like we're going to pull back at least into the middle of this range. Moving over to Apple and Tesla, we did get the continuation on Apple. That's a second day continuation. Big bear day on Friday, about half the distance or a little bit more on the Monday session. Broke below all of those trend lines. Not quite this kind of consolidation zone that we're seeing between 179.50 and 181. If this level breaks, that's going to be quite bearish here for Apple. You can see we had a rally, consistently holding this level, consistently testing it here. And if this area breaks, there's not a lot of potential support to the downside. Could go quite a bit lower, similar to what we saw from this previous high, pulled all the way back to 165. That's probably where it would be headed to before it found major support, especially breaking below all the EMAs and SMAs, which it has been below here for 2 days. And then looking at Tesla, found some strength, really strong day, 3.87%. At this point, you should be in the trade if you're trying to trade it at 197.75. That was the level I was watching. We did get a candle like this. We pulled back, tested the 21 EMA. This looks like a really good setup here to 214 in my opinion. Momentum bullish, RSI bullish. Honestly, this really does look like a strong trade, potentially looking for something like this to 214 over the next week or so. I'll be watching this one in tomorrow's session. It is down a little bit after hours. Let's go ahead and look at the hourly chart. Really strong session off that 200 SMA. That seems to be the level that's holding. Got very close to it on Tuesday last week. Tested it again, overthrew it, got back above it. Looks strong. The previous wick high is 204.80, and then if that breaks, like I said, 214. So Tesla looking pretty strong here, coming off of that 21 EMA area on the daily chart. Moving over to Microsoft and NVIDIA. Microsoft was down 0.68, right at the 21 EMA, just a little bit below it at 407.15. 21 at 408.14. Previous low was down around 398. Would expect it to get into that region. You can see a high, lower high. Looks like we're breaking down. You got the 55 EMA down at 390.27. That seems interesting as well. Overall, Microsoft looking pretty weak in the short time frames. And then looking at NVIDIA, positive 0.35, continues to look positive. Still holding right at that resistance. Did get a bit of a rejection from there on Friday into Monday, but nothing super convincing. Still continues to look very, very strong. And then looking at the after hours price action, you can see we did get a little bit of selling, but still holding very strong in that consolidation. Moving over to staples and discretionary, we did see a little bit of a flip here. We were seeing staples outperform, but we did flip. You can see 0.4 to the downside on staples, rejecting off of that trend line. It's not great. It could just move back down to this trend, just a couple of points lower. Got the 9 EMA sitting at 73.80. Momentum stepping down, RSI stepping down, so that's not great. And then you got discretionaries. Went higher with Tesla, makes sense. Bullish on the day, bullish momentum, bullish RSI still holding in there. We got the break of 180.10, so that puts your next price target 185.36, and we are just barely above those prices here from December in the after hours, so that's pretty strong there as well. It was selling off into the end of the session, and then you can see that gap up, momentum ticking towards bullish. So if this breaks out tomorrow from above today's high, then 185.36 should be your next level, or about another $3 of upside. Moving over to breadth, you can see both of these sold off pretty strongly on the day, which is a little bit surprising. The 20-day average hit that 21, 3 days in a row of bullishness, rejected here on Friday and then sold off on the Monday. You would expect it to still hold a higher low, just based on the trend and the price action. It should hold, potentially coming back down to 63, holding that area and then pushing to 86.50. So right now this still looks bullish. And then looking at the 50-day average, this looks significantly more bearish. Back down almost to the 9 EMA, broke below the 21 EMA, broke my level as well at 62.25. So everything besides that 9 EMA does look weak. If it holds the 9 EMA, that's still technically a higher low. Kind of looks like the inverse head and shoulders like we talked about, left shoulder, head, right shoulder. But if that was going to come to fruition, you would have expected to kind of follow through on the Monday session. And right now it has not. So be patient here. If we see more selling tomorrow, this could be continuing lower. So keep that in the back of your mind as we go into tomorrow's session. Moving over to the 2-year and the 10-year yields, found a little bit more strength. The Friday session was surprisingly weak for yields, but they did find some strength here today. 2-year yield going higher off the back of that 2-year auction, right back to the 200 SMA. The trend's still intact, looking for that 4.8 level. 10-year, not as strong, still bullish on the day, 0.73, but momentum still fading, so looks like consolidation, support down around 4.23 and resistance at 4.35, waiting to see what happens. We broke this structure that we had. It's happened before and we got right back into it, but right now this looks a little bit weaker. 2-year definitely showing strength. Moving over to the dollar, you can see we ended up getting a bearish day. It's still holding that 200 SMA on the daily chart at 103.73, but you can see this weakness into the open of the session, found sideways chop during the session. So interesting, still bearish momentum, still bearish RSI. And you can see that broke below the 50 line on RSI. That's quite bearish as well. So pretty interesting. We're testing the highs here from January. No clear changes, but this continues to look pretty weak looking at that 200 SMA. Moving over to bonds, you can see J&K sold off a little bit, still in the middle of this range. TLT on the other hand, hit that trend line and then sold off, hit this trend line and found a little bit of a bounce. Bullish momentum, RSI selling off. Definitely mixed signals. This still looks a little bit bullish to me with this lower low, but not at the trend line. Found a little bit of strength, which is interesting. Like I said, the 10-year, I was bullish on it, but it looked a little bit weaker here today than I thought it would be. And you have TLT holding a higher low, so this could go a little bit higher. and momentum is supporting that thesis for at least a little bit of a push, maybe to that 200 SMA at 95.19. Moving over to the VIX, you can see we did get a slight sell, 0.07% momentum bearish, but we're still holding right in the same range from the Friday session, still holding a higher low from this previous low. So we'll see what happens here. Pretty interesting level. If it's going to hold, it really needs to do it now. And it looked quite weak at the end of the session, and I'm surprised we didn't get at least a little bit of a pop there on the VIX. I thought this might close more like a wick, but it didn't do it and ended up holding in this area. So we're right at the highs here from the mid-December levels as well, so keep that in mind. Nothing super convincing, but still holding above that 55 EMA. Moving over to my accounts, I did manage to make a few dollars on the day, close to like 200 or so, I think. And looking at the positions, you can see no changes to the IWM. If this continues to rally, I might roll it out a little bit, but right now I'm just sitting on it. We'll see how that plays out. I might move this back down to just playing the 2-day options. Right now, there's only about a few $100s left in terms of potential profit over the next month on this position. And then looking at the Qs, I did sell a 437 for tomorrow for $1.50. I would have rolled this down into the end of the session if I had been paying attention, but I didn't. And you can see here, price was back down around 436, so I would have sold that at 436. Either way, I made money on those calls here today, and then I did make a little bit of money on the puts. I rolled them out a little too early, got some decent selling. You can see 84 cents at 436. I might roll these early in tomorrow's session depending on the price action we see, or I might just take them off and see what we get if markets continue to sell off too aggressive. And then in terms of the strangle, still collecting money on that. And then TQQs, no changes here either. 55 call, made a little bit of money there. 58 put, made a very small amount of money there as well. And I'll be watching this one closely. You can see we were down on the day 8 cents, but we are down about another 20 cents on that position going into the after hours. So right now, short-term bearish on the NASDAQ and trying to play a little bit of defense on these positions, but still bullish on the Russell. Let me know down in the comments section what you think of Zoom. Is that an opportunity there? Or the charts, does Tesla look like a good opportunity up to that 214 level? Or is this another fake out? Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.